Welcome to Hardfire, and the first edition in our new format, our new short 13-minute format.
Yes.
I have with me Cameron Weber, who is a PhD in economics and history from the New School for Social Research, and was the chief of financial oversight at the United States State Department. And I understand you were sworn in by Colin Powell at the State Department. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was. I met Colin Powell. I was the chief of financial oversight of the State Department in 2002, 2003. Colin Powell was the Secretary of State, and I met him. He swore me in. Yeah, as it was a civil service position, and prior to that, the Secretary of State would only swear in the Foreign Service officers. So Colin Powell was a more inclusive in terms of.
And were you ever a Foreign Service?
I was also in the Foreign Service, also. Yeah.
Okay.
but the financial oversight position was a little higher level than the Foreign Service.
Now today we're going to talk about whether money is better than food stamps.
That's exactly what we're talking about today.
Yes. Why is money better than food stamp? Better in what way? And why is it better?
Okay. What we're talking about, Gary, is corporate and social welfare. Corporate and social welfare, which is determined through the political process and what's called in economics called rent seeking. So what happens? Well, so Republicans vote for food stamps in the cities, and Democrats vote for agribusiness subsidies in the rural areas. So that's corporate and social welfare, the way our system works in the United States now. And you can get rid of all of that corporate and social welfare and give cash to everyone equally instead of certain people getting food stamps and certain businesses getting corporate welfare. You can get rid of all of that bureaucratic and technocratic and politically set prices and give cash to people. And when you give cash to people, they start economizing towards the future. Instead of, if you give food stamps to people, they just live food stamp to food stamp or voucher to voucher or housing subsidies. They just live month to month or voucher to voucher. They don't think about the future. So you can get rid of all that paternalism and replace it with economizing behavior, which is cash.
And would you give cash to everybody or just to people who are now receiving food stamps and agricultural subsidies?
Okay, so right now there's 100 million people in the United States receiving food stamps. Almost a third of the population. Yeah. So that's 1/3 of the population that gets food stamps, and then we all know that the agribusinesses are very, very big companies, with $500 million or $500,000 salaries in the executive position. So. Yes, what you could do is I did some calculations, and you could get rid of all of corporate and social welfare. Get rid of it all to certain people and give $1,000 a month cash to everyone over the age of 18 and older at the same cost of the current welfare state. So yes, it would be cash to everyone, but that's not really our point here. Our point here is that by giving vouchers, as you know, for transportation subsidies and housing subsidies and electrical subsidies, heating subsidies. People don't learn to economize. They become addicted to these subsidies or these food stamps, and they don't think about the future. And so if you replace that, and that's a self-defeating. That doesn't allow for self-actualization. That doesn't allow for determination of your own future. So you can get rid of those food stamps and give people cash, and then they start thinking about the future.
Now, is that to suggest that that food stamps and other of those sorts of subsidies, those other kinds of targeted subsidies, are intended to keep people dependent on those subsidies? They provide no way out of the trap, would you say?
whether or not the trap is intentional or not, is that what you're asking me? Whether or not the politicians actually like the trap?
Well, I guess it's two questions. Is there a trap, and is it intentional?
Well, I teach economics. I teach 110, 120 students every semester. And what I use is an example of the minimum wage. Now, the minimum wage hurts those people who are new to the labor force, perhaps don't have the social skills or the language skills, and therefore can't produce value at the minimum wage. So you put in the minimum wage, and then those worse off can't find work. So do politicians put on the minimum wage to actually try to help people, or to prevent people from finding work, and then they have to go on food stamps and subsidies, and then they continue to vote for the people that give them the food stamps and the subsidies? So you're asking me whether or not that's intentional, or whether or not it's just unintended consequence of some kind of misplaced benevolent behavior. I can't really speak for everyone. I can't tell you, but I know in the case of the minimum wage, it helps labor unions. Because
how does it help labor unions?
Well, because on average, labor union members make twice as much as the average American, right? So the average labor union salary or wage is twice as much as the average American's salary or wage. So when you raise the minimum wage, it makes the labor unions not look so bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It makes the experienced union labor relatively cheaper.
Relatively cheaper,
both
in terms of hiring and firing and in the public perception, I would think. And so the Democrat Party, of course, is big on the food stamps and labor unions. So the Democrats like the minimum wage and the food stamps because it assures them votes, right? And the Republicans are big on the corporate welfare, the agribusinesses. So whether or not the two-party duopoly American political system actually encourages this type of paternalistic dependency, you're asking me whether or not it's intentional or some kind of historically derived phenomenon. I can't tell you, but I know that politicians promise one thing and do something else.
There's some important issue that I want to touch on, that they're giving cash allows people to make decisions based on their own preferences and their own resources and their own options.
Yes, and only an individual knows what's good for them and brings value to them in their life. So by turning over these decisions to bureaucrats and technocrats and politicians, you don't allow individuals to find out who they are.
Do you mean to tell me that the wise bureaucrats don't know what is best for each of 300 million individuals whom they do not know?
Yeah. Hayek calls that the fatal conceit, where bureaucrats or technocrats believe that they know better for individuals than those individuals themselves. But there's a different point about cash and food stamps I wanted to touch upon, and that's food stamps and housing vouchers, whatever, only go to certain people, those who are registered with the government, those who have adopted the government payment systems and things like that. By giving people cash, you create competition against those monopolies. And competition brings higher quality and lower prices.
What monopolies?
Well, the people that accept food stamps. You know, food stamps accepted here, but not food stamps not accepted here. You know what I mean? So by giving people cash, then they can shop anywhere they want, not just the government-registered places.
You're talking about stores that accept food stamps. They have to be registered.
Yeah, they have to be registered. Same thing with housing. Housing has to be registered with the government in order to have that type of subsidy.
That's right.
So by giving people cash, you create market incentives. And people start thinking instead of being dependent upon the state. And so I guess I'm self-interested in this regard because I like to be around people who are thinking for themselves and exploring alternatives and looking for creative ways to solve problems, and not just people who are dependent upon handouts or the crony capitalists who become millionaires through corporate welfare. So that's why cash is better than food stamps.
Okay.
Some
and
of the
now
reasons.
we do have a little time to talk about
Yes.
how cash would be better than corporate welfare. Okay, we've
Yeah.
spent all this time
Oh,
talking
wait,
about.
I also wanted to mention something about the refugees. Right, we have there's lots of people dropping bombs on a lot of people, and you have these refugee camps and things like that, and they get clothes and in-kind contributions. So instead of these in-kind contributions, we could give these refugees cash, so they also start thinking towards the future instead of just living day to day in these camps.
But where the refugees are, there's nothing to buy.
Well, if you allow the cash to come in, then people will go to where there's competition and market behavior to try to get some profits. That was the problem with the New Orleans situation. You had this disaster in New Orleans, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or we can call it the Fix Everything My Ass, is what they call it in New Orleans, didn't allow people to come in and bring volunteers and bring in-kind, or they didn't allow competition to come in to sell building supplies. So that's why New Orleans was depopulated, because you didn't allow the market to work.
Well, wouldn't that lead to price gouging?
You hit all the right questions all the time. Yeah, it leads to price gouging in the short term, but then the increased prices then brings competition, and the competition then lowers the prices and increases the quality and the quantity.
Price gouging is
A short-term phenomenon,
and
as is the whole idea of the fear-created welfare state as a short-term thing to get votes, because time preferences for politicians are immediate. Right? You have to get in your face to get my vote. Vote for me. I'll create fear, and then I'll pretend to solve that fear as long as you vote for me. So that's why cash is better than food stamps.
price gouging does not apply to a person's entire budget.
Right.
And it's temporary. So if a person has to pay...
As long as the market is allowed to work, price gouging goes away.
So if a person has to pay $6 for ice instead of $1, it's only for a week.
for 2 days.
Or 2 days.
As long as the market works.
And it's not a person's entire budget that's multiplied sixfold. It's just the ice budget.
Unless you're getting an ice food stamp. Then, but if you get cash, then you substitute into something else, Gatorade, for example. as long as you have economizing behavior and the market works.
If the market's allowed
then
free to
you,
work.
Then you think towards the future.
Okay, well, it has been marvelous talking with you, Cameron.
Gary, thank you.
We're going to wrap up now. So I just want to invite all of you to join us next time. Make sure you join us next time on Hardfire. Thanks for watching.